Well, hello Internet, and welcome to part 18 of my How to Make Video Games tutorial series. In this part of the tutorial series, I'm going to cover numerous mechanics that are going to make it possible for you to make many different games. What I'm going to specifically focus on is moving Miss Pac-Man with precision through a maze. And we are going to be using pivot points rather than collision detection, and pivot points are going to make for very precise handling and movement without any sorts of problems, and it's also going to be much more lightweight in regards to the calculations that are going to be needed to perform. And I'm also going to cover organizing game objects inside an array and numerous other different things. Like always, all the images as well as all the code is available on a link in the description underneath the video. And I have a lot to do, so let's get into it. Okay, so here we are inside of Unity, and I went ahead and did a couple things ahead of time. And I did this because I think it might be easier for you to understand. So what we have here, I went and created turning points, which is an empty folder here. And then at each of the individual points inside of our maze that we have here, at every single point in which Pac-Man or Miss Pac-Man would be able to turn, I have a point. And these are all empties as well. So I just went and created an empty. I just went up here and I went create empty, and I created all these individual points. Then what I did was I went up here and I clicked on this little guy here. I call these gizmos, and gave each one of them a little dot. And that's just so that we will be able to see the gizmos on the screen. Also, what I did, I went into our dots folder, selected every single dot, and you can see right here, I went up there, and I went and created a tag for each one of those. How we do that is I just go add tag, I go, well, let's just show you. Add tag, and then you click on the plus button, and I made tags for points, dots, pills, as well as Miss Pac-Man. And then I just went and selected them right like this, as you can see right there. So I did that ahead of time, and like I said, I did that for all the dots, all of the pills, as well as Miss Pac-Man, and also for all of our turning points, just like you see there. In regards to the individual points, of course, they are going to just be moved into place with precision. Once again, 1 and 1, you're just going to go throw the empty point inside of there, and then you are going to select it and put it in position inside of the inspector. I think that is the best way to precisely place all these points, and as you can see, there they are all placed inside of our little maze. I then created scripts for the points, the individual turning points, and you can see right there what I put inside of there. I have the turning point next points that we are going to be able to move into, and to set all of those up, what I did, let's just go and select all these. So I'm going to select all of my points just so you can see them on the screen. I went and, let's say we are at this turning point, I went and dragged into the inspector all of the potential positions or points, pivot points that we could move to from this point. So let's say you're coming up here, you hit this guy, and you know you can make a right, an up, a left, or a down. I went and put all of those individual points. Whoops, let's go. Geez, how do we even select that? Let's just go and grab this one here by default. All right, so we have this individual point based off of this code that I have right here. I can zoom in and show it to you. I'm going to write a lot more code inside here also as well. This is where we're going to store all of the individual points we will be able to move to from each of the individual points. So let's go and select a random point once again. So you can see I selected this guy right here. From that point, I'm going to be able to go to the 23rd or the 30th point, and you're going to see that if I click on 23, see, it's that one down there. And then if I click on the 30th point, you're going to see it's over there. All right, and how I did that was I just created that array, of course, and then I dragged those individual points from over here in the hierarchy into the position on the individual screen. There's no way to really do this programmatically, so I just did it that way. And then we are going to generate also the directions that these individual points are inside of code. I'm going to write that code here in a minute, and that's going to go to, or that's going to go inside of another array. I also created a Miss Pac-Man script here and attached it to Miss Pac-Man. You could see that there's nothing there. I'm going to be creating that. Also created a game board script, and that is going to be assigned to my game board, of course, which is called GB Grid or Game Boy Grid. We're going to write all the code for that in this tutorial as well. And then the final thing that I did was for Miss Pac-Man, I went in and I created a rigid body as well as a circle collider for Miss Pac-Man. And you can see all of the settings that I set up for that. So you can just go and pause your screen and put all that inside of there. I've covered all of these things numerous different times, so I don't see any reason to, go over exactly what's going on. I'm just showing what's going on here. And we have Miss Pac-Man set for triggered, of course, so that whenever she hits one of our pivot points, we will be able to acknowledge it hit a pivot point and then react to that movement inside of that pivot point. I also, with my points, also created a circle collider, and you can see is triggered is also set there. And that is every single thing that I did ahead of time. It sounds like a lot, but not really. And you can go and pause your screen and set up your screen exactly as I have it set up. Also already showed you that. And I didn't do anything with my grid previously. And I did nothing, no changes to my main camera either. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump into the game board script and set up the array that is going to hold all of our individual turning points for our game. And you may be wondering why I didn't just come in here and why don't I just come in here and play this just so you can see something, because I want to demonstrate exactly why I'm doing things the way that I'm doing them. All right, so let's say that I would have instead surrounded all the individual parts of this with colliders. I could have did that. However, that would cause a lot of problems. Let me cover a couple of the potential problems. If you remember from our Mario game, whenever Mario was moving across the long platform, he would occasionally hit a problem with and collide with a collider even though it wasn't supposed to be there. There are sometimes flaws with using colliders, and that's one of the reasons why I did not put colliders on all of these individual pieces and then had Miss Pac-Man go inside of them. Another problem is, let's say Miss Pac-Man is moving along and she comes and she wants to go inside of this part of the maze. She wants to go from here up into here. Well, as she's moving, if she isn't precisely at an individual part, like exactly in the middle, and she comes up here and she collides with, say, the collider that's right here, that is going to throw her over here, and she's actually not going to move like Miss Pac-Man in perfect alignment inside of our maze, but instead she's going to get pushed sideways or diagonally whenever she hits this collider and gets pushed over in this direction, and it's just going to look sloppy. So what I'm going to do is instead use those pivot points, and that's going to allow me to have everything be very, very precise. So hopefully I cleared up all that stuff. Now I'm going to jump into the game board script and start setting everything up. All right, so here we are. Now what I want to do inside of my game board script is I want to create an array, and it is going to hold all of my game objects eventually. But at this point, what it's going to hold is just the turning points. So to create this, I'm going to go public, and we're going to store transforms inside of here, and like this. And I'm going to call this game board points because it's going to have all those pivot points inside of it. And we go new and transform. And how big should it be? Let's jump back over into Unity. Now, if we come inside of here and we select these individual points, well, we see that. I'm trying to find, there we are. All right, so we have this guy up here. It hits as high as it can go. Remember, it starts off at 1 down here in the X direction. 0 is the outside of our maze. So based off of that, we know that this is 29. So our height is going to be 30. And let's see if I can guess where. I don't need to guess. I just need to click a couple times here. There we go. So there is our third point, which is at the far right of the screen. And you can see that that is set for 26. So it's going to be 27 by 30. All right, so we're back inside of here. So we're going to go 27 by 30. So that's how big our array is going to be to hold every single thing we need for our game. What else are we going to need to do? Well, I'm going to need to get references to the empty that's going to contain all of my points. So I want to get a hold of the game object called turning points, which is like that folder, and I want to get a hold of it. Let me jump over to Unity and show you again. So what I want to do is get a hold of this guy. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how to cycle through and grab all of these individual points and then throw them into the array that we just created. So this is what I'm trying to get, this game object. So to get that, I'm going to go game object, or let's make that private. There's no reason for it to be public. So we'll go private game object and turning points. This should be public because I need to get a hold of this array and do things with it. So that's definitely going to be that. All right, so we go turning points. Got that set up. I don't need to create anything else. Inside of start now, I'm going to just create everything, and I'll never have to do anything else with the game board, at least at this point. So the very first thing I want to do is get the empty that is named turning points, which I just showed you a second ago. So I'm going to go turning points is equal to, and to get that, you just go game object, and you go find, and you type in what you're looking for. So I'm going to go turning points, and there it is. And then what I want to do, I want to cycle through each point inside of that empty, and I want to put them in the array. So to do that, these are all transforms, of course. So I'm going to go transform, and I'm going to call it point in turning point. Oh, this is going to be turning points. Whoops, there we are. Turning points and transform. All right, so we got all of those. We're going to cycle through every single one of them. Then what I need to do is get the vector position for our point, and that's going to be a vector 2, of course. Position is equal to point position, and then I can go now and put the point inside of our array using the location it is inside of our grid. All right, so I'm going to go game board points, and I need to, it is an integer, but I'm just going to make sure. So I'm going to cast it to be an integer, and position X, and once again, integer again, and this is going to be position Y. And then I'm going to store the point that we found inside of there. All right, so that's how we set up our array and put all of our turning points or our pivot points inside of it. And that's all we're going to need for game board. So now what I'm going to do is jump over and set up our turning points. All right, so I went ahead and I already talked about how for each of these pivot points or turning points, we are going to store references to all of the pivot points it can move towards. And of course, it doesn't have any of the ones that it can't move towards. Also, what we're going to do inside of this guy is we are going to store for each point inside of here, we are going to have another array that's going to be exactly the same size. And what this is going to store is the position in relation to each of my pivot points. So here we go. Let's come in here and just look at this. So that means if we're using this as an example, this pivot point right here, and we know that it can move upwards or it can move to the left, what we want to know is what direction in our game board is that. So if we want to move from this pivot point to that pivot point, how do we do it? Well, we would use a vector 2. That is going to be a -1 for the X and a 0 for the Y. And if we want to move in this direction, it's going to be a 0 for the X for the vector 2, and it's going to be a positive Y. So we need to store inside of the other array, let's grab this guy, inside of vector 2 next point, we're going to, in this situation, let's just grab this one instead, we're going to store from this to the next pivot point is going to be -X, and the Y is going to be 0. And in this one, it is going to be a 0 for X and a positive Y to move up. All right, so we're just moving using vectors on the XY plane. And now I need to go in and I'm going to generate those guys automatically or programmatically. So here we are again. All right, so let's set this up. Very first thing I want to do is I want to initialize the array that will hold the vector to each of my nearby pivot points or turning points. So that is going to be called vect2nextPoint. Probably could have came up with a better name than that. But let's go, and this is going to be vector 2's, of course. And then I'm going to go next points. length. It's going to be exactly the same size as this array that we have right there, of course. Then I'm going to create a for loop, and I'm going to cycle through and generate all of those points. So I'm going to go I is less than next points length, and then generate that. Then what I need to do is get each point so that we can find its position in relation to our current turning point. So I'm going to go, and this is going to be a turning point, and this is going to be called next point equal to next points. Then I need to get the vector to the next turning point. So for example, if it returns a vector 2 that is 1, 0, that's going to be to the right. Or if it returns a vector 2 that is 0, -1, that's going to be down. So I'm going to go vector 2 once again. Point vect is equal to next point transform. And then I want to get the local position. And then subtract from it, transform dot local position, which is going to be this turning point's local position. And then the final thing I want to do is store the vector to the vector2 array. And to do that, I go vect2 next point is going to be equal to point vect. And then I have to mark this as normalized. And the reason why is this could come back with, say, a -5 and ,0. I want it to be forced. I want to force the -5 to be just a -1 because that's the way vector 2s work. So it basically, that's what normalized does. It receives a value and then it converts it into either a 0 or a 1 because that's the way everything's set up in Unity. And that's all I need to do for my turning points. And it's going to automatically generate all of those directions. So now what I got to do is jump into my Miss Pac-Man script, and then we're going to start animating Miss Pac-Man. All right, so the very first thing I need to do is I need to come in here and get our system library. You're going to see in a little bit what that is going to be used for. And then I have to think about all of the different things I'm going to have to store, property-wise for our Miss Pac-Man to work. So she is going to have a speed, of course. So we're going to give her a speed, and I'm going to have this set for 0.4f. I use that a lot. I don't know. To my eye, that looks like a good thing. What else am I going to need? Well, I need to be able to move Miss Pac-Man. So, of course, that means I need to have access to her rigid body. So I'm going to go rigid body, 2D, and I'm just going to call that RB. What else am I going to need? Well, I'm going to need, I don't know. That's all I can think of right now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create our awake function inside of here. And this is just going to make sure that components have been created whenever the game starts so that I don't try to access a component that hasn't already been created. And the one that I'm going to need is a rigid body. And to get that, I'm going to go get component. And this is going to be rigid body 2D. And I'm going to set that up. So as soon as the script runs, this guy right here is going to be run, and it's going to make sure that everything is set up and is ready for me to go. Then inside of start, what do I need to do? Well, only really one thing. I need to get Miss Pac-Man and have her start going to the left whenever the game starts. To do that, I'm going to go rigid body and velocity and set it to a vector 2. So if we want to move something to the left, what do? We pass it a -1 for the X and 0 for the Y. And if I want to move it at a certain velocity, I'm going to go and multiply that times speed. All right, so we have that set up. Now what do I need to do? Well, I want to move Miss Pac-Man around on our screen. And to do that, I'm going to use fixed update. So I'm going to go fixed update. And we use fixed update whenever we move things using rigid bodies. And there's going to be a lot of code here. So basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to accept input on the keyboard. So if we want Miss Pac-Man to go to the left, we're going to have A. Want her to go up, that's going to be W. Go to the right, that's going to be D. Or down, that's going to be S. So I want to get her horizontal movement. I'm going to call this horizontal move, whatever. That's good. And to get that, I go input, and then I go get axis raw. And this is going to be called horizontal. When we've done this in previous parts of the tutorial, that's just going to get me either input from A or from D. And I've covered that previously, so I'm not going to get into where that comes from. It comes in Unity. What the heck, I'll show you. All right, so if we come in here and we click on Edit, and we come down to Project Settings and Input, and then Axes, see, horizontal. There it is. And this is going to be negative button is left, and the positive button is right. And then we're also going to have everything set up for A or D. All right, so there it is. And vertical has exactly the same thing. Say S or W. All right, so that's where it comes from. I like to cover everything just to make sure people aren't confused. All right, so we'll go Input, and once again, I'm going to say Get Axis Row and Vertical. All right, so there's that. So now we got it. Now what are we going to do? Well, we are going to check if they pressed A. So to do that, we go if and input. Now what we're going to do here is we're not going to pay any attention to the maze at this moment. What we're going to worry about now is getting Miss Pac-Man to move, and that's all we're going to care about. So we're going to go and get A, and to move her around, what I need to do is change the direction to the left in this situation since A was pressed. And to do that, I go get the rigid body, and I go velocity, and that's going to be equal to new vector 2. And I'm going to go horizontal move, and then that's going to be 0, of course. And we're going to multiply that times speed. And speed, of course, is going to be able to change if you want Miss Pac-Man to move quicker or slower. And I have that as public. See up here? And if you want to change that directly inside of Unity, you can just, if we click on Miss Pac-Man, you can see that speed is going to be set in our script. Oh, why isn't it there? I didn't save it yet. That's probably why. It's going to be right here whenever I save the script. All right, so here we are again. So let's come back. And what do we want to do? We want Miss Pac-Man to face to the left, the sprite for Miss Pac-Man. And to do that, we go transform, and local scale is going to be equal to new vector 2 and 1 and 1. And then I also want to set the rotation to the default. And to do that, we go transform, and local rotation is equal to, and there's that crazy thing, and we're going to go 0, 0, 0. Then we're going to check for other input options. We're going to say else if, and we can go and copy this. So let's just go and get all of it. So we'll go else if and grab all of this because it's going to be very similar. Or actually, let's grab all this. So let's just grab all of that. And then we're going to also have the else if. So we'll go like this and then paste that inside of there. And we'll say else if they pressed D, we're going to change that. And we want to move to the right, but we can keep using the horizontal move. That's not going to be a problem to move to the right. However, we want this to change the direction to face the right. So in that situation, we'll change that to a -1, and then we'll keep the rotation exactly the same. Then we'll come down here once again, paste that inside of there, and now we're going to be moving in the upwards direction with W. So we're going to have to change these guys. And since we're moving in that direction, we're going to now change that to 0, and then we're going to use whatever the vertical movement is right there for that guy. What else are we going to do? The transform local scale is going to remain exactly the same, 1 and 1, and the rotation is going to be the same. Okay, so we'll keep that there. And then for our final one, we are going to check if they pressed S, if they want to move Miss Pac-Man downwards. Put that inside of there. Once again, we're not doing anything on the x-axis, so we're going to use vert move. And that's going to move that downwards. And all of the rest of this looks like it is going to work perfectly fine. So we got that, and that. We can get rid of the else if because there's nothing else there. And we could save that and jump over into Unity and test it out. So let's go and run this. And you can see there's Miss Pac-Man. Boy, she is not moving well, is she? What's going on, Miss Pac-Man? And you can see her face is going, why is it going so slow? Let's go and change that. Oh, I see what I did. I meant to have this be, the speed be 4 instead of 0.4. I don't know what I was thinking, so just change that to 4. And also I made another little mistake with the Miss Pac-Man here. If I want her to look up whenever the keyboard button is pressed, the S, or that's going to be look down. If I want her to look down, I need to change this guy right here to 270. And then whenever the other one is pressed, right down here, I'm going to have to change this to 90. So let's go, put those in there and save it. and run it. All right, and then after these changes, you can now see Miss Pac-Man is moving left and right, and also she will move upwards and downwards. And in the next part of the tutorial, what I'm going to do is set it up so that she works inside of the grid system and everything is perfect. So like always, please leave your questions and comments below. Otherwise, till next time.